19th, Grants Pass City Council Workshop. Getting started just a little late this morning, but people are settling in. First up today is urban renewal.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I hope you had a good weekend and were able to enjoy the sun before this rain settled in. I'm Dana Pierce. I'm the Economic Development Division Manager for the city here. And today we're going to review urban renewal, the projects and funding. This presentation is going to go over a little bit of an overview of the URA and its purpose. We're also going to look at the current resource allocations, consider the effects of the funding on the water plant and pool projects, and then also look at the URA project goals and see how they fit into the bigger picture of the URA. We'd like to discuss the development of a 5-year implementation plan, which would be a rolling strategy that would help us kind of get started on our progress towards our URA goals. The urban renewal plan purpose, as you all are pretty familiar with, I'm sure, is to use tax increment financing to have high impact projects and make a high impact for economic development here in the city. The way that we can do this is by leveraging private investment, boosting tourism, helping with job creation, also increase our tax base and really look for a return on investment when it comes to using these funds to support private investment. We always need to consider also the public benefit and that it's meeting our goals and objectives for the plan. This is our current URA plan allocations. You are really familiar with this breakdown, I'm sure already. Probably the most significant change I think that has been made was an increase in the housing development program to 10 million. And I'm not sure exactly when that happened, but that was within the last year, I think. Yeah. Here we have our prior fiscal year allocations. So these don't affect this coming year. These are already allocations that are in place. So this $2.2 million is available for these projects. We can just go through them quickly here. We have the Spalding Industrial Park development, and a portion of that was just recently allocated for the sewer upgrades. We also have some funds that are allocated for spending on the downtown Welcome Center design. There's progress being made on the 5th and G Street Plaza lighting. With Jim Love, he's currently working on a community survey to get some feedback from the community. Our business retention and relocation assistance program is active and running, so that's in progress. And we also are making progress on the Riverside Park improvements for the band shell. The only 2 projects on this list that have funds allocated but aren't really being spent are on the Business Innovation Hub and then the blighted building and removal. On the far right, you can see the URA project goal. This just gives you an idea of which goal these projects fall under. And you can see we're making progress towards 6 of those goals we have in the plan. This is just a quick reminder. I'm sure you remember the diagram that was shared back in January. It's really an example of how we're looking at prioritizing our URA projects and our thought process. So if you remember, it's really looking at our total balance and what we have moving forward. You can see with just over $4 million with our large projects like the water treatment and the caveman pool, those kinds of projects can't be paid for all at once. So we're going to have to think about those large projects and how we roll those out over time. So moving forward in creating a path, we really should be looking at our big picture goals, which we do have established. We need to prioritize those current projects. So, which comes first, or can we have some of these projects running at the same time and working together to effectively and efficiently implement the plan. We already went through a lot of our projects already, but the water treatment plant, the pool, those are large projects. Industrial infrastructure in the northwest and southeast parts of the community, those are going to be costly. And then we also have that concept of the grant and loan program. We also need to consider using projection tools in order to figure out how to best use our funds. And I think in the development of a 5-year implementation strategy, that's where we're going to be able to utilize those tools to look at how we lay it out. We anticipate there would be a rolling project implementation of sorts, which, you know, if there's a larger project happening, it's going to roll over several years, whereas other small projects might be able to happen and finish within 1 year. We'll obviously be fulfilling our financial obligations by reporting annually and also seeking public involvement in order to keep our urban renewal plan partnering with the community and really highlighting that private investment. So with all that in mind, we can still dream big and continue to think about projects for the future. These, again, are our current projects, and in this chart, I've just categorized them in a way that I think kind of makes sense for us to look at. So along the left-hand side, you can see these are our public infrastructure and city-owned projects. Some of those are really just the larger public infrastructure, like the sewer plant and the water plant, but we also have some focus on the industrial areas for that. Or we also have community and tourism assets that are really for the purpose of public use. The improvements to the parks, the downtown plaza, and the public swimming pool. And then on the right side is more of a private partnership and incentivizing private investment. Those projects really fall into categories for the grant and loan eligible projects. And underneath that, you can see each of those kind of falls into 2 different categories. One of the focus on business and property incentive versus a larger project that would be more like a developer size incentive that you'd want to provide. And then also amongst our plans, we have special projects. Again, these are more like larger partnerships between the community, so that's what the business incubator would be, or a developer type partnership like the town center plaza. I should note also the percentages. It says URA percent, and that's the percent of the amended plan allocation money that each project takes up. So let's dig a little deeper into public infrastructure. Again, we've got our projects that are already lined out in the plan, but here are some other potential allocations for other capital projects that are already in the works. You can take a look here, replace and upsize a Fifth Street storm drain and some costs. There are no URA funds currently allocated for that. I did mention the Spalding sewer. There are some funds allocated, but it's underfunded at this point. And you can see some of these other projects that are in the works. ODOT does acknowledge the importance and need for some improvements at Foothill and Agnes. And then, of course, the Fourth Bridge project is part of our transportation systems plan, which would be updated in 2026, but is something that could be considered for URA funds. When it comes to public use, our city-owned projects, again, we have those listed already, but what are some other potential catalyst projects that we could be looking at? The downtown libraries may be an example of this, where public agency and district partnerships can come together to create a bigger, better project for the community. I also looked at some of the other URAs in Oregon, so you could see some of the public use projects that Coos Bay has done. They did a visitor center and also contributed to public art. In Eugene, they created a plan for a town square that they were contributed URA funds to. And in Lincoln City, they put in EV charging stations. They also built the Gateway Plaza and contributed public art. When it comes to that private investment, the grant and loan program, several of our goals fall under this category. And as I noted in that previous chart, they really can be separated out into a business property incentive versus a developer incentive. They're really different size incentives. For a business or property incentive, you might look at something less than $50,000 and do an annual allocation of sorts where that money is available each year to incentivize those smaller projects. In the case of a developer focus, they're most likely going to need something that's over a $50,000 incentive or support, we would maybe consider a reserve for that to be prepared for some of these projects that might come down the line. But also some potential program designs we could consider all around for the grant and loan program would be developing just general program rules and guidelines, then project-specific criteria for some of those shared goals. So for example, if you were going to look at the North 6th and 7th Street corridor and improving all of the facades, you could have it specific in the criteria for that grant program. You could look at annual and semi-annual cycles or even competitive elements. In other URAs in Oregon, most all URAs have some sort of facade grant. In La Grande, they have a matching facade grant and also a larger call for projects competitive annual grant, which could be interesting to put out there and see what comes to the table. Dallas has a building improvement grant, and theirs is up to $50,000. And Coos Bay also has many facade grants, and I put in some examples here, show some before and after pictures of the different projects. On the left, you see the vacant commercial property wasn't being used here, and with only a $25,000 urban renewal investment, help that property owner get it up and running again. The Egyptian Theater restoration, it was a phased project, so those funds rolled over for several years to help get that project done. And then in the case of the Dolphin Theater, you could see it was quite a bit larger investment, the $111,000. But all of these projects were within their grant program guidelines. Looking at special projects, so these would be larger partnerships to some extent, community and development partnerships. The ones we have in our plan right now are the Business Incubator and then Downtown Center Plaza. But some other potential catalyst projects we could look at would be other public agency and developer projects like the second story residential or mixed use commercial idea of downtown. The Riverfront Tourism Commercial, which this image is actually from the Greater Grants Pass Plan for Downtown River District. But something along those lines, or an aquatic center even, looking at a bigger project for the swimming pool. Other URAs in Oregon also do a lot of the second story residential mixed use development, and as well in Coos Bay, they did another developer partnership. So that top left image of houses being built, that was a URA owned property. They put out a request for proposal for development and awarded a developer the contract to do the work. They created 9 family units. And in that case, one of the incentives was that property became owned by the developer at the end. Also in Coos Bay, they did a historic downtown restoration where they utilized a short-term loan to create 11 units in an upper story. And then on the top right, you see a before and after. That's their waterfront commercial. So that's a big project where they took underutilized land and they turned it into a really nice commercial zone. In La Grande, they did a second story residential as well for affordable housing and mixed use. They created 10 apartments and 5 storefronts with a pretty minimal URA investment of just over $34,000. So when we're considering an implementation strategy, the elements of this 5-year strategy could include small manageable projects like the facade upgrades on 6th and 7th, preparing for larger projects, maybe creating a reserve so that we're prepared to partner with developers, identifying and securing key sites like those of the Riverfront Tourism Commercial and the Town Center Plaza, or even leveraging city-owned property to initiate projects and really incentivize development. All along the way, we should be considering public involvement, the council and private sector alignment on these projects, and also a combination of financial resources. Maybe the URA isn't always the first to pay. They could be the second, third, fourth partner in the deal. We'd always obviously can fulfill our annual financial obligations and create a rollout for the implementation of these projects. The financial implications here, our current balance as of June 15th less the $55,000 from the Bohemian is just over $4 million. In FY24, the approved budget for your maximum flexibility, there was no allocation to specific projects. It's just a $5.7 million amount set for special payments and transfers, along with the $250,000 set for grant opportunities. And then for FY25, this is just of note, the projected budget from previous direction was to set to plan for $97,000 to go to the water plant for future debt service. So those are things to consider there. The call to action today is at your discretion. You can move to action, or we can move it to an additional workshop. But the alternatives to consider here are to prioritize the URA projects, direct staff to engage the public, direct staff to develop a 5-year implementation strategy, and formalize and promote the grant and loan program.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah.
Council, do you have any questions? Brian?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, on the last slide, right before this one, you mentioned a $97,000 special payment to water for future debt service. It seems really small. I don't recall that.
Yeah, the 97,000 covers the current debt that has just been taken out. So we signed contracts on the state drinking water revolving loan funds. That 97,000 is the 18% of those funds.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions? Rob?
Yeah, I forget what slide it was, I'm fumbling for it, but there was talk about how the sewer project on 5th is going to need additional financing. Oh, I'm sorry, stormwater project on 5th. And I'm just wondering, does that mean that our SDCs are insufficient, or how do we end up in a situation where our stormwater project is underfunded?
I think the intent of that slide, and I was not privy to the conversations between you and Wade, I think it was that Urban Renewal could help to fund that project. Stormwater utility is pretty well funded, and we will be able to fund that project in several years with both a combination of rate and system development charges. I think the intent was, because it is happening right in that downtown corridor, which is part of the Urban Renewal Agency, that it would possibly qualify for funding from Urban Renewal.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Val?
Yeah, I just want to I guess a little bit more clarity on, and I do know, and I do remember doing the 18% of the debt service we went through with the revolving loan. But I just want to know, when we do that in the debt service, I guess it's because my thought is there a way to use, since we know 18% of the debt service can be used for projects dealing with loans and things for the water treatment plant, is there any way that it would actually lessen the water rate or not? How does that work? And I guess my question goes back to JC. It's not a question for you.
I think it's a JC question.
Yes, it is.
So Jason may jump in here too.
Okay.
I don't think that at this point these contributions would lessen the water rate. I think it would minimize the increase
Cost.
that would need to be there if we didn't have that URA contribution.
Okay, so basically it's lowering the long-term cost, but it's not doing anything in the short term.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Vanessa?
Thank you, Dana. Earlier this year during strategic planning, we did participate in a URA strategic planning also. Was that shared with you?
I don't recall. I don't think we went over that.
Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Brian?
I just wanted to follow up on Valerie's question about the 18%, and I kind of told you about that. I know that on this project list, it's always been listed as a percentage, whereas every other project it's listed as a number. So I don't know if we can get to a point where we can maybe put in a range for that, or just maybe looking for input on that.
I think we can. Where we're at, I've been running numbers. We're looking at having to borrow between $25.5 and $60 million for the water treatment plant. But I think if you go to table 15 in the original urban renewal plan, they had a fixed dollar amount in there, in that table of what it would pay out over years. And it would be a total of $17.9 million for the water filtration plant and a total of $5.34 million for the wastewater treatment plant expansion.
Okay, so we're looking at numbers far greater than what was originally intended for those line items.
The 17.9 million actually probably is pretty close to the same number when you run them today. The 17.9 that was in the original plan.
But you're saying now it's going to range between 25 and 60?
25 and 60 million would be the debt service offering. And if the agency were to pay the 18% of the
that
debt
number.
service, that number would be about the same.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I had another question about I guess it's more about the URA in general. The project list that we have here, the total dollar amount at the bottom is 50.9 million, plus the water and sewer projects. Do we know, what is the projected total revenue of the district over its life? Is it close to that number, or do we?
Give me a second to pull this up. Actually, I did this morning. So approximately over the next 24 years, or the life of the URA, at I would say, conservative 3% growth, you're looking at about $67 million.
Great, thank you.
Rob?
I know, I think I brought this up once before, you know, when you get a call to action, you talk about engaging the public and so forth. I think it was either Jason or Brad that mentioned when we were talking about mixed use for older buildings and so forth. I think it was Pendleton, apparently, that has been really successful. There's one developer, I guess, in Pendleton that's been very successful with that. And I'm just wondering what it would take for someone from our city to reach out to that developer and ask him if he sees anything here that interests him, or if there's anything there that developers here might want to know from him, if he's had success doing that. Because we keep talking about, you know, second-story development downtown, and we keep doing very little with it. So if we have a good example somewhere else in the state, I think we should probably talk to whoever's involved with that, whether it's Pendleton city officials and/or that developer.
Yes, Council, you're right. That we had a conference up there last October, and took a tour of downtown Pendleton, and their URA manager was there, as was the developer who actually you know, was awarded the URA money, and he walked us through a couple of the projects. We have spoken with, you know, with the URA manager in terms of what kind of incentives they used, and several of those are incorporated into what Dana shared today. We haven't tried to reach out to the developer who actually did those projects, and we could certainly do that. I think he shared some of the lessons learned, which were, you know, parking was a big one, because they waived the parking for his project, which is a redevelopment of an existing old mixed-use building. You know, we're covered there because in our central business district, we already don't require the parking. The SDCs was another big one for him. We would allow under our URA program to, you know, to cover SDCs. You know, it really is kind of finding a developer who's willing to, and has the knowledge and has the ability to tap into the lending resources, you know, to be able to access that private capital, and then, you know, combine it with the URA capital, and somebody who has that expertise and willingness. But all that being said, we could still, you know, reach out to see if there's some other lessons learned from that gentleman.
So just off the top of my head, two things that always seem to be an impediment to those types of projects are fire suppression and elevators. And is there anything that the developer or the city of Pendleton did we learn anything from, were they able to do anything with reducing costs or reducing requirements for those two items?
I know on the elevator example, they were. That was one of the project expenses that they helped to fund. I think that building already had an old shaft, but they had to reconstruct it and do some things with the elevator shaft. I don't know on the other on the fire suppression if they were involved, but we certainly can today under Grants Pass's URA fund fire suppression as well.
May I also add that Main Street programs, they actually have funding specifically for this type of project. And we don't currently have a Main Street program, but it is something that's we're working towards forming right now. So I imagine a second story restoration project probably would be more like in the 3 to 5 year time frame that we'd start looking at that. Not that we couldn't use it as a catalyzing project and put more money towards one project just to see it happen, but I think ultimately if we want to see it, many people do it downtown, it would be a benefit to have those extra funds coming through the Main Street program. There are also definitely private interest for that sort of project downtown. I've definitely had multiple property owners inquire about support with that type of a project. Even with the incentives we offer, though, it's not feasible at this time. So,
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I had one more clarifying question about that range that you said. Would that be with regards to the brick grant, whether or not we get the brick grant? Like if we get it, it'd be on the lower end. If we don't get it, it's on the higher end?
Yeah, with the brick grant, our borrowing would only need to be about $25.2 million. Without the brick grant, our borrowing needs to be closer to $60 million.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right. Is there anything anybody would like to start discussion? I guess first, does staff have handy, do you have the prioritization that we did in January?
Downtown second story was one, and yeah, we can pull that up. I can pull that up while you're talking.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just trying to see if council has any priority projects that you want to start talking about, or just use this as food for thought today and move on. Valerie?
Well, I kind of, we've been talking for years about a second story, doing something because of the cost and putting a little bit more money into it. And I know that with us moving towards doing a plaza, I just think it would be really nice to put some money into housing up in a second story, because that's, like I said, it comes down to every time you give a $50,000 grant or whatever here and there, and then it's so much more expensive for them to really do anything that I like that commitment towards working towards that goal.
Brian?
So back at strategic planning, the downtown upstairs spaces had widespread support by council. It looks like at least 6 councilors supported that, and that was the #1 item of the urban renewal list. So I think that makes sense to dive into. The #2 thing was the downtown plaza streetscape lighting item. #3 was the pool, and #4 was the southeast industrial area. I would definitely be in favor of moving forward on figuring out some sort of program for the downtown upstairs spaces. I don't know what that looks like, but I agree with Valerie that I think that's something that council has widespread support for and that we could probably move forward with.
Looks like there's some widespread nodding going on up here. Okay. Any further discussion on this or questions, Aaron, or?
No, I think if there's consensus with council, we'll start aggressively developing that program and looking at what we can do to have something established to help incentivize. And it might likely take the form of meeting again with you to discussing parameters on how you would and how much you'd like to incentivize and how, but we will have a framework for you to consider.
Sounds good. Looks like Brad's trying to.
Yeah, just to confirm then, one of the figures that Dana put up there was the 250,000, which is in the FY24 budget for grants. So we have, we do continue to receive inquiries from folks that are in the URA, to tap into some kind of grant money. We have just had the one to date. I think there was general consensus when that Bohemian award for 55,000 was given, that you want to continue that. I know that obviously the formal decision, is still pending next week's, or is it, I guess, this week's council meeting. But in terms of our promotion, if you will, and marketing of the availability of that 250,000, I guess unless there's some other direction today, we were just going to, continue forward, assuming that Monday or Wednesday night, council adopts that budget, and that's in there. So I just wanted to confirm that's sort of our intention, and if there's anything different, if we could have that direction today, that would be great.
Okay. Nobody is jumping in to say anything different from what I can tell. Brian?
No, I don't disagree with any of that. However, this is our first urban renewal workshop this year, and we haven't made a lot of progress on it, so I don't know that I'm ready to stop discussing it quite yet, since we have a lot of resources here available to use. Staff sent out a memo outlining the capability for loaning or borrowing against the agency, and that number is a pretty substantial amount. So we have resources available to do things, and our community has needs. And I don't know that we would all necessarily agree on what the priority of those needs are, but I certainly think we'd all agree that housing is a priority, and we have a housing development program in here slated for $10 million. So I would potentially be interested in seeing what that might look like, not that whole amount, but doing something on the housing front, since that's an ongoing problem in the community. So interested to hear what other councilors have to say.
Rick?
I like what Brian is saying, is looking at maybe just the first step on the housing, because moving forward to some degree on that, I think would be really beneficial, especially with the community need that's out there. Thank you.
Valerie?
I agree, but I just want to make sure that we have, like I said, the public-private sponsorship. I think that's a really important part of the housing piece, is that we have somebody, a developer or whatever, on board with us to move forward and make it a partnership, not us doing it.
Any further discussion? Rick?
On the housing thing, I think it might be encouraging to developers if we knew there were no other stipulations that this had to address low-income housing, that it, if that's the direction they wanted to go, they have that option. But if they just want to do housing, we're also in favor of that as well. Thank you.
Vanessa?
I don't know that we would want to go that direction, because we wouldn't want this to be in the hands of a nonprofit necessarily. We would want this to increase our tax base. So I think workforce housing is where I'd like our attention to be.
Further discussion? Brian?
I just wanted to throw the idea out there of maybe having a standing quarterly URA meeting instead of how we've been doing it in the past, because the way we've been doing it in the past has not been very productive. So I feel like if we had a meeting every quarter on the URA to get updates and to have discussions. We wouldn't have to kind of reinvent the wheel every time we talk about this. So interested in seeing if council's wanting to maybe have quarterly meetings for URA.
Is there interest in that? Yes? Okay, well, I think I got at least 4 of you. Guess that's a majority today since we're 7. Feel like I'm pulling teeth today.
And
Any
yes,
further-
and that's why
further-
we used to do the thumbs up until we got in trouble, because it was a lot easier to do a thumbs up than a nod your head. So just saying, that really wasn't as bad as it was
Well,
inferred at the
we're
time.
not taking a vote on anything specific, so you can show your thumb if you want, but, all right. Well, let's talk about this again in a couple months, but in the meantime, I think we're going to ask staff to just kind of start some background work on second-story housing and possibly also how to put the $10 million in other housing into action. Sounds good? Okay. Next up, maybe everybody's distracted by the rest of the agenda here. Riverside Park restrooms.
Good morning. Just have 4 very quick slides to introduce this topic for you tonight, or today, or whatever time of day it is. So just basically giving you a quick update on the current disposition of the portable toilets in Riverside Park in anticipation of this week's reopening of the park, and that relates to your council goal of leadership. So what's shown on the map here reflects the most recent location of the porta potties in Riverside Park prior to the closure. As council knows, there's been a couple of different locations of these. Again, here's the 2 bridges. So we had on the west side, on the McKinney side, there was one there, and then kind of just behind the ball field there in the drive aisle on the east side. So they have moved around a bit. You know, we had some concerns from East Park Street neighbors, and so that got moved from the East Park Street parking lot further north. We also had some concerns from the River Park Terrace folks, and so that got moved around a little bit over here. But this is where they were prior to the closure, and then they were removed. So I think some of the goal today is to discuss what does council want to see as we reopen. I will say that in terms of that moving them around, Best Toilets, who is our contractor, you know, has been very good to work with. They're very responsive. Typically, you know, same day service. Sometimes, you know, next day, depending on their workload. But that's really not too much of an issue from their standpoint. Just a reminder, these costs, I checked on them last week. They remain pretty much the same as what we've shown you in the past. Those toilets are $85 to rent, and that includes, you know, 1 time a week cleaning. So anytime we do more than that, it's $10 to get an extra additional cleaning. If you do 2 toilets, that's $170 for the 2, plus, you know, that includes the 1 time a week cleaning. We have had the hand washing stations. Those are freestanding hand washing stations that are there. Those are $50 still. And then, you know, just depending on the demand and the amount of use, some of our crews have, you know, called Best and say, hey, these need to be cleaned again today, or they need to be cleaned twice today. So that continues to happen and is available for us. In terms of the revenue source on these, as you know, you allocated $8,000 of ARPA funds. Prior to that, we were using COVID grant money. Both COVID money and the $8,000 of the ARPA money dried up a few months ago. So as of about late February, early March, we've been using Parks general fund money to pay for the toilets. And then, of course, staff resources to kind of manage those. And this is completely at council's discretion today. A couple of alternatives up there, maybe extend the use of the 2 portable toilets and hand washing stations for a specific period of time, add toilets, remove toilets, request additional information. And of course, this links very closely to Wednesday night's discussion, where you're talking more about the potential new enforcement rules related to parks.
Thanks, Brad. Are there any questions? Rob?
Brad, can you show us on the map where the brick and mortar restrooms are and what the hours, those hours that they're open?
Sure. I always forget to pull up our laser pointer here. Yeah, so there's 2 sets of brick and mortar. One is, up fairly close to the yard, the maintenance yard, that have been closed for a few years. And then the other brick and mortar are more centralized, right in this area. So those are, and they're open, concierge goes through and opens them, typically around 7:30 and then close them at 10 p.m.
Thank you.
Brian?
I wasn't aware that the second set of restrooms by the yard had been closed for so long. I was just wondering what the reasoning was for that.
Yeah, that was prior to my coming on. I don't know if Aaron remembers exactly why. I know that there's some maintenance concerns there. I believe was why they were closed. It would take some money to get them reopened to be functional.
Okay. And then I had a question about the costs of the portable toilets. You said that those costs included a once-a-week cleaning, and that we're requesting more frequent cleanings than that, which is that unit cleanings line item. Is that a regular cleaning? Is it daily? Is it as requested, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's changed, a little bit since we first put them in 21. Initially, we were doing them just at 1 time a day. They moved to 2 times a day for quite a while during COVID in particular. A few months after COVID lifted, they went back to 1 a day, and that's where we are right now. That's where we have been. So that unit cleaning, as you said, that adds in the $10.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So does staff have a sense of the porta potties, especially the one that is on the eastern part of the park? Is that used primarily overnight? Is that used during the day? Do we have any sense of what hours that receives the heaviest use?
I didn't ask my parks team that specific question. I did ask them, what's your observations? There continues to be a reduction in the number of fecal incidents that are occurring in the park. There's still a few a month, but that's significantly down from what it was. But your specific question about time of day, of course our staff aren't there at night, so they wouldn't be able to observe that. But we can try to get a better sense for that.
I mean, my reason for asking, I think would probably be obvious that if starting Thursday we have essentially less overnight resting people on the western part of the park due to no tents being allowed there, I'm just wondering if we need if that's a top priority for a location for a porta potty, if you know, during the day, they can use the brick and mortar, and if overnight there's not many people there, I don't know that we necessarily, I don't know if that's a good prioritization of our funding.
I think that makes good sense, Counselor.
Joel?
People can correct me, but my impression from the time I've been down there is a lot of the people that use that bathroom use the parking lot and sleep in their cars. And there's some people that camp by it. So Rob, a lot of the use of that bathroom is by people sleeping in their cars in that parking lot, and they park right by it. And there has been some tents that camp right by it. They tend to be a magnet. But I would say the major use of that is probably the car parking.
Other questions? Vanessa?
Thank you, Brad. When we originally installed these porta potties back in 2021, was there a decrease in our brick and mortar restroom vandalization? Did we see a relief there?
There was, just, over the course of several months, we did observe a few less calls for, plumbing contractors to come out, clean out the plumbing. And then the needle count also, because a lot of times, Best has reported back, they don't give us like regular reports, but we just talk with them, and there's frequently many needles in those porta potties when they empty them. The reduction in the needles in the brick and mortar toilets, as well as some of the other things that kind of get flushed down there, those are probably the plumbing is probably the biggest issue that we did see a decrease in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Valerie?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as Joel, that I noticed that parking lot tended to be the one on that, not as many tents, but there's a lot of parking on that, as well as off the lower one, am I correct? They have a lot of parking in both of those parking lots, and that's probably where the bathroom usage comes from there. How many sharps containers, or how many do we have throughout the park right now? Because I did read the county's report, and they said that where there were sharps containers, they did not see as much usage, much needle problems. I was just wondering in Riverside Park right now where those are located.
They're just in men's and women's in the brick and mortar. That's just the two.
Rick?
Continuation of that, is it possible to have sharps container within the porta potties? Because otherwise you're implying that they just put it down, they throw their needle in with the waste.
Right. I don't know the answer to that. My hunch is that no, because of the plastic wall, and those are metal, and they do have to be mounted in a particular way to prevent them being torn off. But that's just a hunch. So we could check with them, but I don't believe that is a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Just to follow up on what you said, Rick, it sounds like they're kind of using the portable toilets as sharps containers, so as long as Best doesn't have a huge issue with that, I don't know that we need to go through the trouble of putting containers in those. But I had a question about the permanent restrooms. Don't we also have a third set up at the softball field? Isn't there a set up on the, is there not one there?
I think there are, aren't there? Are you talking about?
On Park and Vista at the corner?
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. I think I forgot to mention that.
And are those open, closed? What's the situation with those bathrooms?
The only ones that are closed are the ones that are nearest to the yard.
Okay, so the softball field or baseball field ones are opened on the same schedule as the one by the playground?
Same schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So what do you want to do about this, council? Dwayne?
Guess it's my time to talk finally. I am talking to my constituents in this area. Obviously, you heard from Vista. People and they want less traffic, obviously, in that area, and I think by putting a porta-john on the, I guess that's the east side, is just encouraging more parking over there. And obviously, that's right where the shooting was at. And there already is a bathroom over there in that corner, and I just don't think that we need to, we keep talking about state and creating danger. Well, we're creating danger for the residents in that area too. So I think the whole goal was to keep people that want to overnight in a different area or push them to a different area. So I would be not in favor of putting another porta-john on the east side. And I would actually like to remove one of the porta-johns on Tussing also, since the footprint will be lower.
Anybody else? Brian?
I agree with Dwayne that I think once Riverside is back open, we only need to go back to one porta potty at Tussing. That totally makes sense. However, at Riverside, what's going to happen is Riverside West is going to become busier, potentially a lot busier. So I would personally like us to potentially be open to the idea of having 2 portable restrooms at Riverside West, because I have a feeling that that area is going to see a much higher level of use after we update these ordinances, and after the places where people can camp is way more restricted. I think that a lot of people are going to gravitate to that area, and my concern is that one porta potty in that area will not be sufficient. I am kind of on the fence about the one on the east side. I see benefit to having it there. The public health report said it was beneficial to have more bathrooms because they were seeing less problems with waste and needles with more bathrooms. So from that perspective, I think it might be good to keep it over there. Yeah.
Rob?
Yeah, I agree with Brian's point about the west side. I'm likely seeing much greater density of people staying overnight. I mean, that's just, put it this way, the people that are on the east side of the park are going to be somewhere. Right now, they're in Tussing and West Home and so forth. So we've seen that this group of people did move from Riverside. It's likely that many of those people are going to move back to Riverside. That would be my guess. And I would think that they're going to be on the west side. As far as, so to have 2 porta potties over there, to me makes sense, especially if one of them were ever incapacitated. Because I know that Dwayne, I don't think you were on the council at the time, but we did hear from Brad that the parks employees were finding far fewer fecal incidents throughout the park as porta potties went in. And we were having trouble at that time with parks employees. Apparently, we were told that morale was very low because they were doing jobs that they weren't hired to do. They didn't expect to have to do. So I think that needs to be considered if we're going to remove, anytime we remove a porta potty from an area, what result may happen. So I'm in agreement that I think that we may want to reorient the extra Tussing porta potty to the west side of Riverside, because that's likely where there's going to be a greater concentration. As far as removing it on the east side, I just have to wonder if that is going to create more problems for our parks employees.
Valerie?
So the restroom up in the, by the ballpark, does that have, because it's a regular restroom, does it have Sharps container in that bathroom? Because it's a brick and mortar? Does anybody know? Does the restroom by the softball field have a Sharps container?
I do not know that right now. I can find out.
Okay, because to me, like I said, listening to the comments by the county health department, that seems to make a difference as well. I would like to think that as we open, as the park opens and basically on the east side, it's more of a day use area. That I agree. I think that the west is going to take the hit, and I can see the use of 2 restrooms there, just because of the amount of people that will be setting up tents in that part. And I would, like I said, hope testing is somewhat relieved too. It's just something I'd like to monitor over the next, few months, just to kind of see. So I think what I would go for would be just 2 restrooms on the west side and taking from Tussing, and then just monitoring the parks and seeing where we go. And if I remember correctly, you said it was actually the parks employees who will call best if they see that there's overusage, and so we can get a report back from that as well. So that would be my suggestion.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I support also having an additional restroom on the west side of Riverside. As we see the usership of that park increase, we're only going to see that need increase. I don't know that I necessarily support removing from Tussing yet until we do see that there's a decrease in usage at that park. Concerned that we might remove it and need to reinstall it if individuals who use our parks to rest may continue to use that space. So I support the additional sanitation services on the west side, and like Councilor Lovelace had said, if there isn't a Sharps container in that softball field restroom, I do also support one being installed.
Dwayne?
First got a question. Is there any Porta Johns at Morrison Park?
Don't believe at this time we do.
Have you had any incidents with Morrison Park with feces?
There have been. There have been some instances.
When's the last time there was one? When's the last time there was an incident? Do we know?
I do not know the last time.
All right, thank you. According right now, there's probably 20, I'm just gonna say, I live, in my ward has the worst parks, the worst areas. I have to deal with it. I have Morrison, Fruitdale, Baker, Riverside, and the rest of you have hardly anybody in your parks. Tussing's the next one. It's like The Walking Dead in my neighborhood, seriously. I drive through it constantly and see this. And then I have the bottle drop. You might as well put that in there too. My people are screaming to me. They want something done. There's no Porta John in Morrison. I drive through there every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and we have no Porta John there. There's probably 20 to 30 people there right now, daily there, and we're not having feces problem according to staff. So why are we encouraging more Porta Johns? Why are we encouraging state-created danger areas when we don't want to do that? But all of you want to keep putting Porta Johns out there for them. If we're not having problems, why should we put them there? I just don't understand that. Most of you live in areas that don't have homeless problems. I do. I'm the one that's seeing it every day. I'm the one getting the calls, the emails. All those ones on Vista, that was me encouraging those people to write you guys because they want something done. They want to be safe. One of their cars got broken into Saturday night on Vista. There's not even homeless people there. So I'm totally against adding more Porta Johns, encouraging more behavior in this town. I'm encouraging in that we have one Porta John in Baker Park, and there's probably 20 to 30 people at least in there too. So I don't know why we're going to continue to add more, encouraging more people to sleep in parks. I would say if we're going to have people sleeping, they need to be spread out through the city, not encouraging one area. Just where I'm at.
I think in response to that, the reason why we added them at Riverside was just a matter of proximity, that we at that time had a large number of people camping on the west side, and it's about a block and a half walk to the restrooms, and they're not open 24/7, so we were having more incidents of people not using the restroom and just going outside, and that was creating the problem. So that's the situation at Riverside. So Morrison does have a bathroom. Tussing doesn't have an open restroom, so that's one of the differences there. But I think if you think you're the only one of us getting calls and complaints about this, you need to ask your colleagues. Questions? Comments? Rob?
Yeah, I mean, just one comment. Dwayne, the reason that I supported additional porta potties is because I actually believed staff when they told me that and they told the council that they were having more feces incidents, and we put porta potties in for a trial period, and when we came back and had a report X number of months later, we were told that that problem had abated to some degree, and that's why I supported the second round of them, and that's as clear as can be. This has nothing to do with me wanting to encourage and attract more unhoused people to any park in the city. It has to do with the practical reality that there are certain biological functions that occur in a timely manner with all living things, and we are actually acknowledging that that's real. And that's what we heard from staff, and you may not believe it, or you may not have heard that, but I believed it. It didn't have anything to do with me encouraging and wanting more unhoused people in any particular park.
All right, well, I have 4 people who have spoken up in support of doing 2 restrooms on the west end of Riverside Park. A little bit more, I guess, less certain about both the east side of Riverside Park and as well as Tussing, what direction you want to go there. Several people haven't spoken at all. Brian?
Well, I was on the fence about the porta potty on the east side, but I think in light of the public health report, I think it would make sense to keep that there.
Valerie?
I guess my concern is the cost as well, because we all know where it's a cost. So that's why my thought was to move the one in the east and have the one that's currently was moved to Tussing moved back to the west side, so that we would not be increasing the amount of port potties, but keeping it what it was, just strategizing as to where, until we have further information, where the best use was.
Vanessa?
I'd rather us have too many than not enough. We're going to have to pay for this issue one way or another. We can pay for it by paying a wage to our parks employees who have to pick it up off the ground, or we can pay for a porta potty service. There's no way that we're getting out of it.
Rick?
I'd be up for consideration limiting the porta potty on the east end of Riverside. And on the Tussing Park one, I guess I would want to see monitoring of the 2 porta potties that are currently there. And if we see a decrease in usage, then to eliminate one of those. And have mixed feelings whether we're putting 2 porta potties on the west end of Riverside, in that is 1 porta potty sufficient, and how much is the population going to be in that section? And I think we should be flexible and consider the usage and the need. Thank you.
Mayor,
Brad?
there are currently no sharps containers in the upper restroom by Park Street in the ball field.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, it doesn't sound to me like we're talking about adding a net number of restrooms. Right now, we're paying for 4. We have 2 at Riverside and 2 at Tussing. So essentially, it sounds like what we're talking about is just eventually shifting the one at Tussing to Riverside. So it would be a net neutral amount of porta potties. We wouldn't be adding any. And I think it makes sense for park staff to very closely monitor the occupancy at Tussing and Riverside as we reopen Riverside, because that's going to be the key indicator of when that porta potty should move. If we see a mass exodus from Tussing to Riverside, that's when the porta potty needs to move. If it's slower, then it doesn't need to move as fast. And I would honestly feel comfortable enough allowing park staff to monitor that situation and make the decision to move it as they saw that occupancy change.
Dwayne?
We have one porta potty at Baker, and it seems to be working just fine because there is no other bathrooms there, and there's probably at least 20 to 30 tents there right now. So I'm against adding more than one porta potty to the west side of Riverside.
Okay, well, I guess, do we need a motion?
So we would like to have a motion, and if you could, Mayor, also ask for the motion to have an end date on this service so we can maintain that this is temporary in nature. Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 2 months, maybe it's 4 months, but we would readdress it at that time after there's a sunset to this service.
Okay. We may want to break this up into a couple of motions, but Brian?
I'll try to make it all one motion. I move to maintain our current inventory of portable restrooms and to shift one of them from Tussing to Riverside as deemed appropriate by park staff, and to revisit and evaluate the use of the porta potties and the location of the porta potties in 6 months.
Is there a second? Seconded by Vanessa. Discussion on that? Rob?
Yeah, I would, I like that motion, except that I'd rather see it revisited in a shorter period of time. I'd like to see it revisited in 3 months. Or if staff has any updates prior, of course, we want to hear that.
Rick?
I like Rob's comment, revisit it in 3 months.
Brian?
I'd like to amend my motion from 6 months to 3 months.
Seconded by Vanessa. All right. Discussion? All right, so the motion was to maintain the current inventory of 4 porta potties, shifting one from Tussing to Riverside as the parks staff deems appropriate. Was that it, Brian?
That's it. Just for sake of clarity on the motion, I think we do have a total net of 5 porta potties. So, because I forgot about Baker, so I will, I guess, just change that small little piece.
Okay, 5 including Baker, and to revisit this in 3 months. Any further discussion? All right, Brian, you made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Dwayne?
No.
Joel?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
All right, motion passes 6-1. Valerie?
I just have, is there any way, I don't know if you need a motion, if we can look into getting a Sharps container or what that would entail up at the ball field restroom? I don't know if we can ask another agency.
No, we'll just put in a Sharps container in the restroom.
Thank you.
up there.
Any further discussion about the restroom situation? Okay, move on to the next item is park buffers.
Afternoon, Mayor Council. So I have not prepared a PowerPoint for this particular discussion. Instead, I wanted to reference the GIS imaging that we've provided to you over the last weekend to kind of talk about the park buffers. So as a little bit of a primer, Council is going to be deciding on Wednesday whether to institute park buffers from certain park amenities. These amenities include playgrounds, ball fields, covered gazebos, brick and mortar restrooms, and the like. And so as of right now, what you're going to see in the packet indicates 20-foot buffers from all of those amenities and 50-foot buffers from waterways. And so after kind of getting a little bit of feedback from council, we wanted to kind of illustrate a couple things. First, we wanted to illustrate what the 50-foot buffers would look like at parks at smaller parks other than Riverside. And we also wanted to illustrate the effect that walkway buffers have on eliminating parks open space where portable structures may be erected. So I'm going to go through these parks and just stop me if you have any questions, okay? So what you're looking at is Baker Park here. So you have on the left, and this is going to be the common thread with all of these parks, on your left side are the ones with walkway buffers, and on the right side are without walkway buffers. So as drafted now, it would be 20 feet. Now, the only difference with this map is that this indicates 20 feet from a waterway. So if you could imagine that this will extend over just a little bit more, so then you're going to have this area and this area available for individuals who want to erect structures. And this is basically the status quo. What you see on the right is going to be the status quo, with the exception of the restrooms here. Yes, sir.
Mike, Dwayne?
Baker go on the other side of the parkway too?
Does it? That's a good question. I think it does.
It does. So there's a lot more room over there on the other side too.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next park. So Croxton, you're not going to have too much of an issue. This is a waterway of 20 feet, or not a waterway, a walkway, sorry. So Depot Park, you can see here that there's a playground. Now, one of the pieces of feedback that we got was possibly instituting different buffers for different amenities. And so what this illustrates is the 50-foot buffer from playgrounds and, splash pads, which are deemed to be part of them. So if you look at Depot Park, you look at the image on the left, you see that there's not going to be a ton of space to erect portable structures. And that's really the effectiveness there of instituting a buffer from a walkway.
Augustus?
Yes, sir.
On this one, the current situation is neither of those, right? The current situation is obviously no buffer.
That's correct.
Okay.
So this is showing a 50-foot buffer with, from the playground with and without the walkways.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So here's Eckstein. You can see the impact here. So really the point of the buffers is to allow for enough space for individuals who may want to erect a portable structure. This doesn't mean, and I want to make this clarification now, within those buffers, that doesn't mean an individual may not rest or sleep. It just means that they may not erect a structure within those areas. So here's Fruitdale, again, with the 50-foot around the playground, 20 feet around the amenities, the fields, leaving this area here and this area here. Here's Gilbert Creek, same kind of scenario. My understanding, however, of this area is that it's sloped somewhat. So effectively, it'll be a really difficult order to have somebody erecting a portable structure if that's what they want to do here. This is the skate park, 20 feet from the amenities available there. Here's Lawn Ridge, again, showing the 50 feet. And there's no walkways in this park that are going to be affected. But you see that it leaves this area here, even with the 50-foot buffer from a playground. Morrison Park, same kind of deal. If you don't include the walkways, then you're going to basically be having the status quo that you have right now. Individuals will be able to erect portable structure pretty much wherever they want along the walkway. But it's kind of difficult to see with this image, but these are 50-foot buffers around the splash pad here. The playground, the first playground, and then the second playground here. And there are buffers from the edge of residences, so residentially zoned properties. That includes townhouses, regular houses, and apartment complexes. Here's Ogle Park. And then here's Redwood Park. So you can see a lot of the same with a slightly bigger park. Having the buffers around the walkways reduces the green space where individuals may erect a portable structure, but again, doesn't foreclose an individual from sleeping or resting. Here's Riverside Park west of 6th Street. There's that one walkway right along the road. And then this, because this is a 20-foot buffer, it's showing a 20-foot buffer from the river, it's really going to expand out from this light blue shaded to about here and all the way down. So Riverside Park east of 6th Street is kind of a moot point in that no portable structures are going to be allowed to be erected at that location. So the buffers themselves really don't serve too much of a purpose. Individuals will still be able to sleep and rest there, just without portable structures. But you can see the difference with the 50-foot around the playground and the attached splash pad, in addition to the walkways and the other structures. So here's Tussing Park with and without. Same thing with the water line here. It's going to extend out just a little bit further. So you're going to have limited areas where individuals may elect to erect a portable structure. And this walkway, the bridge itself is included as a walkway. So there's going to be a 20-foot buffer from that location as well. Here's Westholm Park, same deal. Here's a bigger playground buffer with the other 20-foot buffers maintained. And then here's a list of the parks of unique nature. So Kesterson, there's nothing that's going to create buffers here. Loveless Park is a park that has interwoven walking paths. So you're going to have a situation where in this area down here, at the southern tip, is going to be the only available area for people to erect structures. Martin Park and Stansfield Park are all surrounded by residential properties. So that would completely foreclose those locations from being used for places where people could erect a portable structure. And so with that, I'll take questions.
Questions? Joel?
Thank you for a good visual presentation. It was very, very good, and I enjoyed you sending it out ahead of time for us to review. So this is a legal question. In terms of us being under the injunction and then restricting the amount of area that's available for people to put up a structure to keep warm and safe, what's your slant on how much land is reasonable and how much is not?
So I want to, before I go into that, answering that question, I want to emphasize that the buffers do not foreclose people from sleeping and resting in those areas, right? So all the buffers do is prevent the erection of portable structures. So there's still going to be available space for people to sleep and rest in all of the parks. It's really just going to be focusing on the conduct of erecting a portable structure. Does that answer your question, Counselor?
Well, there's also the requirement then of reasonable measures to keep warm and dry.
Correct.
And so tents can affect that.
That's correct. I mean, if we're being honest here, tents are the most widely used forms of temporary shelter by homeless individuals. However, we're getting into the summer months. People are going to have their pick of where to go in the city. There are going to be parks that do allow the erection of portable structures. So they're not going to be necessarily shoehorned into one park or one location. There's a lot of factors that you have to think about when we're thinking about a situation like that. We've got to think about the size of the park and the location it is from major streets and getting to and from there. I think that it strikes a balance because it doesn't affect where people can sleep or rest, and there's still adequate space in other parks around the city that allow for the erection of portable structures. And based on that, that's kind of where I had initially been going with the 20-foot buffers. It was to try to avoid any sort of issue on that front. And another thing to note is that these rules for portable structures go for everybody, and there will not be any selective enforcement.
So your next job was the Ninth Circuit?
I wouldn't want that job.
Okay.
Other questions? Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Augustus. Just to kind of follow off what Joel said, this is going to be more complicated when the winter months come, because they will come. And then we're in a situation where warm and dry is a much bigger issue. And then these buffers have a much bigger impact on that. So how is that going to play out?
That's a great question, Counselor. And so there are ways that I think that you can plan for that when it comes to the erection of portable structures. One way to go about that would be perhaps temporary suspension of the buffers during the cold winter months, or if there's a need for it. That is completely within council's discretion. Another would be to direct the city manager and to give him or her the discretion to waive those park buffers. Now, the reason I say the city manager is because city managers actually, in the municipal code, the individual who's responsible for updating the park rules. And so a delegation of authority to the city manager at council direction might be an effective way to counteract that as the season does change. But that's going to be completely within the discretion of council. If there's a need to change that policy, we'll make it happen.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So I don't know if I'm following why there could be a need to change the policy in the winter. To my way of thinking, just simple arithmetic, it would seem as though if there's enough square footage in all the parks combined to provide each unhoused person with a 6x6 or an 8x8 area, it would seem as though it shouldn't matter what season it is. In other words, if there wasn't enough square footage for a tent for everybody, I get it, but are you saying that we actually would exceed or we would have a deficient amount of square footage to have a tent for everybody? Because otherwise, I don't see why there would be an issue regardless of what season it is.
No, I'm not saying that I foresee it. We're talking about ifs and buts here. That again is kind of the rationale behind 20-foot buffers from park amenities, right? Is to provide enough square footage for people to go if they want to erect a structure. And I would agree with your point that if there is enough green space to erect structures, then yeah, changing the policy shouldn't be an issue. But effectively what we're doing now is looking into a crystal ball, right? Riverside Park is being essentially used as a pilot project to see how the erection of portable structures, limiting it to a certain area, goes. So it's a little bit more difficult to answer that question right now. I'd be kind of looking into a crystal ball.
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, I had another question, and actually I think this might be more for the chief. As far as practicality of implementation and enforcement, we have roughly 15 parks with different amenities, different sizes, different buffers. How do you see that going for your officers?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I do. But we've never shied away from a challenge. I think we'll be able to figure it out. And it will be a lot of working with all people that are using our parks, whether to recreate or to rest. So I think we'll find that sweet spot, but it might take some time. It'll definitely take some trial and error. I mean, I was even sitting here trying to GPS my own location so I could figure out what would be the best way to try to figure this out. I think there's going to be disagreements between where somebody thinks he or she may be versus where we think they are. However, we are well versed in verbal de-escalation techniques, and I think we'll be able to work our way through it. And I think if we ask this question in 3 months, I'll have a much better answer.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? All right, is there any sort of direction you were wanting today, Augustus, or?
Well, I kind of want to know where council's at with regard to having different buffers for different amenities, just so I can be prepared to touch on that on Wednesday. And then, so we can make the changes, because there is an emergency clause in this ordinance, to make the changes in real time so that they'll be ready for your signature. So I'm kind of wanting to test the pulse here.
Dwayne?
I'll just say where I'm at. I'm gonna go off of council's goals. Number one, enhance community safety. And I'm in the 20-foot because of all walkways. I have a lot of elderly who walk those walkways, and it gives them space to feel safe as they walk through these paths. If someone's sitting there with a tent, they have the unknown who's in that tent versus someone laying there or whatever else, they can still lay there. But from what I'm hearing is they would like the 20-foot buffer from the walkways and passageways because they feel the safety when they walk through Morris, and there's trails around the backside of it. There's trails in a lot of these places. And along a lot of these trails, there's picnic tables and stuff like that. And they homeless like to put their tents on top of these, pretty close to these picnic tables along the paths and benches to sit on. And from my constituents, they want the buffers 20 feet from the walkways so they can feel safer as they're exercising, get out and using the parks.
Just to clarify, what you're going to be seeing on Wednesday does include 20-foot buffers from the walkways. I don't think that was ever going to be in question. There was just there was a question about increasing the buffer for certain amenities that are going to be used more often. So you are going to see 20-foot buffers from walkways on Wednesday. That is currently what's in the packet and for your choice.
Rob, then Valerie.
So I have, I think, a little different, maybe a little different take than Dwayne, but I don't actually believe that most people are looking for 20-foot walkways at all. I think most of our people and the hundreds of people we've heard in council chambers would prefer if there were no homeless in the park at all, and that they got as much of their parks back as they possibly could get. So to me, and I would also like to point out that, you know, I absolutely I'll agree with what Sarah said earlier. There is no possible way in the world that while the biggest problems we have are in the southeast section, there's no doubt that every section has these problems. There's no doubt that people have reported back to all the councilors. So I would rather use the word we than I as far as the sections of the city we're talking about. I mean, within 150 feet of my house, we had 2-car break-ins, and I live in a higher taxed area than many because it's supposedly maybe a slightly nicer area. But anyway, that's kind of, I digress. But I guess what I want to say is that, you know, from the time Martin versus Boise happened, that was an interesting point that, yeah, it shouldn't be illegal to simply not have a house when you want to rest. Okay, since that time, every single thing that's happened has basically been a chess game. Every single thing. And I would have to say that 95 or more % of what the council has done in the city of Grants Pass has basically been dictated by one of our lawyers. This has been a chess game, and we're just following essentially our lawyer's advice. That's all we've essentially done, to at least 95%, I would say. At this point, and I said this to Augustus when we met in Aaron's office, I don't really want to decide about 20 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet, or 10 feet. I mean, I want our lawyers, Augustus and Aaron Heisel, to get back as much of the parks as they possibly can. That's what our people want. They don't want 10 feet or 20 feet. They want it all back, if the truth be told. So the maximum amount that our lawyers can justify or feel comfortable justifying, you know, when it goes to the appeal, the maximum amount they can get back is what I want back. If that's 50 feet, if that's 500 feet, whatever they can justify. If they can't justify 20 feet, then it probably wouldn't be smart to do it. They can justify more, that's what I want, because that's what our people want. We want the maximum. So whatever he and Aaron Heisel can feel comfortable with, that's what I want. Get it all. Thank you.
So just as a point of clarification too, so what the suggestion that's been brought forth, or the different buffers from different amenities, is 50 feet from playground and splash pad equipment, 20 feet, everything else. I believe that that's adequate. I believe that that is defensible. Now, if we're talking about buffers in the distance, right? I mean, it's all arbitrary, really. It's what's really going to be the functional difference between 25 foot and 20? Well, it's all arbitrary. Having 50-foot buffers from everything takes away a lot of green space. And I think I adequately, brought that to you. So initially it was just 20 feet. And that part of that was also to provide predictability for the police department, so they're not out there with tape measures, going to different parks and not knowing where everything is. But when it comes to the play structures being used, right, the playgrounds, 50 foot from those, we can go back through. 50 feet, in my opinion, leaves adequate space for people to erect portable structures if that's what they want to do. Making everything 50 feet was really kind of my trepidation. I mean, let me pull up an example. So I'm going to pull up Morrison Park. Okay. So what you're seeing here are 20-foot buffers for everything except playgrounds. And I'm going to increase this to 50 feet. Now, you can see Morrison Park is completely taken out of the equation, right? At least for portable erection of portable structures. Doesn't mean people can't sleep and rest. It means that people cannot erect portable structures. If we look at Westholm Park, you're going to see the same thing. You're just going to see limited green area. So the suggestion to have one amenity be bigger than the others based on how it's used, based on what we want, I believe that that is adequately defensible. So 50 feet from playgrounds, 20 feet for everything else, I believe is completely defensible. And the question's always going to be asked, why 20 feet? Well, because everything is arbitrary, and I'm tasked with trying to make the best decision possible for the city to protect the city from legal jeopardy. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Valerie, then Joel, then Rick.
Yes, thank you, Augustus, for doing this. And I know it's a lot of work in a short period of time, and everybody's going to argue everything, but I like the 20-foot walkways for, like you said, people who are walking, but I think it's imperative that we do the playgrounds and spray parks, because I think most of us agree that having children have the ability, especially in the summertime, to using those amenities and feeling safe parents and children, I think that will show that we really are looking out for those people for safety, because that's what this is about. This is about the safety of everybody involved. So I support what you've drawn up. I think that is a nice compromise because it does allow spaces. But I think as time goes on, to the chief's comments, is the first few weeks or whatever is going to be kind of crazy, but as time goes on, I think it will be just an accepted fact that just having the playgrounds at 50, I think, is important to let our citizenry know that we know how important children's safety is.
Joel?
So I like what you did, and I would support what you did with the 50 and 20-foot buffers. I would use a little bit different words. I don't think it's arbitrary and capricious. And the reason I don't think it's arbitrary that we would choose those buffers is as follows. There's over 30,000 people in the city of Grants Pass. There's, 500 people that are camping in the parks. It's public property. It belongs to all. And there's no unregulated use in the park by anyone, whether you have money or whether you don't. You have to abide by the regulations. And we need to have these regulations such to promote safety and use of the park by everyone, not just people that have their tent there. So it's not arbitrary. And with those buffers, you still have adequate space to serve the needs of that part of the population. So I don't think it's arbitrary at all. I think it's well thought out, and I think it's defensible, and I would present it that way.
Rick?
I also agree with Valerie's comments. I would be supportive of the 20-foot and the 50-foot. Yes, this is a chess game, and I feel going with that combination it would be defensible. So that would be my direction. Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first one is, I know that the hope is that this is approved unanimously Wednesday night. What happens if it is not?
And it just advances to a second reading. You're just going to have the status quo until the second reading. I mean, but there is an emergency clause on it, correct?
Yeah, that's the key. It's currently set up as an emergency clause, so if we're opening the next day, we're opening with the new ordinances and codes associated with what we're discussing. So if it's not unanimous, then we can't enact the emergency clause. It would go to the next business meeting, and we'd still be operating under the current codes that we have in place.
So that means one way or another, the park is opening, whether we approve it Wednesday or not, or would the park be closed an additional 2 weeks?
If council provided direction to keep it closed for an additional 2 weeks, we'd be more than happy to do so. We've gone off of the assumption that it would be open on the 22nd, but.
Okay, thank you. Did you have some?
To clarify, it's currently at the discretion of the police as to whether the park remains closed.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then once we have this all passed, how are we going to be informing those that are staying in the parks? Are we going to be sharing maps? Are we going to be sharing, how are they going to know what's going on?
Right. So there's also going to be a change to the listed park rules online, right? So those are going to be updated by administration, and we'll push those out. They'll be consistent with the rules that are going to be changed. And again, that's at the urging of at the city manager. The city manager will provide those changes in writing, and you'll see it beforehand. As far as enforcement and getting the word out, I think that's going to be something for the chief to answer. My guess would be that it would include some judgment and a little bit of discretion, at least in the beginning stages.
And my comment to that would be, while we're enforcing the new rules, we'll be educating and warning and explaining. We don't have to issue a citation. We can use our discretion to maybe warn for a couple of days. And then, of course, if we come across repeat offenders and we know we've explained the new rules, then we may choose to cite that individual.
Hold on one sec. So are we going to potentially be handing out like a list of these buffers, and so they, or are we just going to be doing it verbally?
I mean, if it's something that council wants to do, we can explore using the document that we created and kind of think about that, have that at a park entrance or have that passed out. I mean, I think there's a couple ways to do it.
Yeah, we talked about this before. We talked about maybe doing a board, like a park board. We talked about maybe doing like a news stand, a news box, whatever I don't even know if they still have them. But then you could pull out maps of where you can and you can't rest or set up a structure. And then, of course, word of mouth will be very popular as well. So a combination of those, I think we can get through it.
Thank you.
Rob?
So would it not make sense to some degree, mark off on the ground, whether it's flag or mark in some way, rather than assuming that people can use their GPS or their compass to figure out what those maps mean, if they even see a map? I mean, to me, it would be really simple to mark it on the ground. That way each officer knows and every homeless person knows without ever having to see a map.
Yeah, we might have to do something like golf course markers just to give us some kind of indication. We've talked about that as well. So we're speculating and we're thinking of lots of different ways to get through this next week or two.
All right, hang on. Does anybody have a concern about the 50 feet around the playground and 20 feet on the pathways? Because I think that was really the essence of what we were trying to discuss today. Okay, no concerns about that? Okay. Do you have questions about something else or continued discussion? Rick?
Would it be possible or helpful if, for the initial stages, that just the general public or volunteers would hand out information but not discuss the setback if they found somebody within that area?
It's certainly a possibility. I don't think we have that many volunteers to do that type of work. I think with our community response team to include CSOs, and if we have a cadet left, I think we're getting ready to promote a cadet. But yeah, I think there's an infinite amount of ways we can get the word out. And I think, in fairness, people do comply. Our CRT folks receive a lot of compliance from individuals that are unhoused, and those ones that are more complicated, let's say, we might have to enforce those ordinances quicker.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All right. Thank you.
All right, so to be clear, we're going to be doing 50-foot buffers from playgrounds and splash pads, 50-foot buffers from waterways, and then 20-foot buffers for everything else.
Yes. Okay, agenda review. We have our meeting Wednesday night, and it looks like we have quite a lot of things here on the agenda. First up, a public hearing regarding state shared revenues in the city budget. Second reading on the property line vacation that we talked about previously for District 7, a council action item, second reading on the resolution for the safe parking program. Council action item to consider this ordinance related to public space conduct. Council action item on the ordinance that would amend the municipal code regarding residential parking zone on East Park Street. A council action item for a resolution on state revenue sharing. A resolution on levying taxes. A resolution on adopting the budget. A resolution regarding the historic banner locations and design, a resolution for the approval of the tourism grant application program, a resolution on the interphone loan to Bancroft Fund. That's our first council consent calendar item. Other consent calendar items are a resolution for the Josephine County Assessor delinquent sewer charges, a resolution on tax receipts, a resolution awarding the Wesley Lane water replacement, a resolution on women's crisis support, a resolution on delegation of responsible parties for HUD certifications, a resolution authorizing auditor services contract, a resolution on an ODOT grant for transit services, another resolution regarding transit services with JCT, and a motion on the monthly investment report. And then we have the Urban Renewal Agency budget approval, public hearing, as well as a council action item to adopt the URA budget, consent calendar item regarding Urban Renewal Agency tax receipts. And that gets us through June. Then our next workshop would be July 3rd. Rob.
So I have a question, probably for Aaron, but I'm not sure. So, council got emails from people on Vista that wanted to be included, I guess, in the ban on overnight parking for non-residents. And then it basically spurred me to think, well, it should have been obvious, I think, to someone, to me or anyone else, that if we're going to ban overnight parking for non-residents on East Park, that would essentially likely drive those people to Vista and the other side streets. So if council's concerned with that, what's the fastest way that we could deal with that as far as potentially banning overnight parking without a sticker on Vista and some of the other side streets there? What's the fastest way we could deal with that before we have the problem? Because we're going to have the problem.
Yeah, great question, Counselor. And we did mention in the staff report that there may be some movement of vehicles to some of those side roads, and Vista being an important one because it's contiguous to the parks. The simplest thing for council to do is to, in your motion for this action item on Wednesday, to include Vista as part of the parking changes. And it's that simple. And so East Park Street and Vista would be implemented at the same time for residential parking in the evening hours.
Okay, thank you. So, and I don't know if we should be discussing this Wednesday night or now, are there people that would also have concerns on the side streets that are on the south side of East Park Street? Because that might be the next logical place for some of those people to want to park.
Well, I think as Aaron mentioned, we can make that part of the discussion and amendment to, or I guess it would just be whatever motion you made on Wednesday night. Dwayne?
I was just going to further up, but I had the discussion with them, and that's why they did email everybody. I said the best way was to email all of us to let us know how they felt, because I guess they were part of that survey that went out. And I'd hope and encourage on Wednesday that we do take Vista into account. I already talked to Aaron about it. It's easy, just add it to the motion and along Riverside Parkway. And I think that would at least help those people that did write us, that emailed us. I'd only talked to one of them, and then that person went out and spoke to all the neighbors. So I just told them to encourage them. That's the way to get to hold of all of us. And I think that's fair enough that we consider that when we make the motion.
All right, anything else regarding Wednesday's meeting? Valerie?
This is a little tiny, but I just want to make sure there's clarity. Down on the consent agenda, you're getting ready to do the Wesley Lane, and it is in the northeast, it's not the northwest, and it's written in the packet as the northwest, and I just want to clarify that Wesley Lane is a street right up behind the high school, correct? So, because I do know those people, so I want to make sure that that there wasn't some Wesley Lane hidden up in the northwest I wasn't sure about. Thank you.
All right, anything else for Wednesday? All right, anything else that you wanted to get on an agenda going forward? Okay, I'll just note real quick, we did add on July 17th another discussion regarding the public safety funding. And then DJ had requested that we get the Home Builders Association and the infill incentives. That's on July 31st. All right. Brian.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded by Val. All in favor of adjourning today, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, see you Wednesday.